Vienna, 1906, as the gas lamps flickered to life along the edge of the Hofburg Palace courtyard and the bells of St. Michael's tolled 6. Lady Lysandra Penley stood beneath the dripping eaves of the eastern colonnade, her gloved hands clenched tight around the folds of her emerald silk cloak. The scent of wet stone and horse sweat hung in the air along with the heavier weight of her dread. Tonight, her fate would be sealed. She was to be promised publicly, before the court, to Prince Alaric von Esterheld, third son of Archduke Matthias. A man with cold eyes and a colder temper, known for his cruel streaks at the fencing hall and the rumors of what he did behind closed doors. He had already broken a horse's spine in a rage and left a chambermaid with a scar across her cheek. And yet, because of his lineage and the Penley family debts, Lysandra had no choice. Her mother's voice echoed from earlier that morning. "We don't marry for love, Lysandra. We marry so the bank does not seize the vineyard." So she stood in the rain, stealing a moment of solitude before she was dragged into a gilded cage. The heavy doors of the guard barracks opened behind her, and out stepped a man in the dark green uniform of the Imperial Guard, his saber sheathed at his side, boots polished to a mirror shine. He paused when he saw her, then walked forward, removing his cap as he approached. "Lady Penley," he said, his voice low and steady, with the trace of a Slavic accent. "You'll catch your death standing out here." "I was hoping I might," she said, not looking at him. He didn't laugh. After a moment, he said, "If you're trying to escape, the north gate is unguarded for the next 10 minutes. That made her glance up. He was tall, with sharp cheekbones and eyes the color of steel. His name came to her, then Soren O'Callen, son of an Irish diplomat and a Moravian baroness, hand-picked for the guard by the emperor himself. He'd been stationed at the palace for only 6 months, but word had already spread of his loyalty and unmatched swordsmanship. "I'm not running," she said. "Then you're braver than most. Or stupider." He glanced toward the palace. "They'll be calling for you soon." She nodded, then hesitated. "What would you do if you were me?" "I'd disappear," he said without pause. "I'd find a border town, change my name, live quietly. No one would think to look for a countess in a bakery." She looked at him again, longer this time. He wasn't joking. "You'd help me," she whispered. A pause. Then, "Yes." She inhaled sharply, but before she could answer, the sound of boots echoed down the colonnade. A footman rounded the corner, his powdered wig dripping with rain. "My lady," he called. "His Highness is waiting in the Gold Hall." Lysandra looked once more at Soren. Something passed between them, then an understanding, quick but complete. She turned back to the palace, her chin lifting. Let him wait. She walked into the Gold Hall precisely 10 minutes late. The chandeliers blazed, casting light across brocade and velvet, gold braid and polished metals. Alaric stood beside her father, tall and pale-haired, with a predatory smile that did not reach his eyes. Lysandra's steps slowed as she approached, every inch of her resisting what came next. "Lady Lysandra," Alaric said, taking her hand and brushing his lips against her glove. "I was beginning to think you'd gotten lost." "I was just enjoying the rain," she said, her voice steady. "It helps clear the mind." The engagement was announced an hour later, to the polite applause of the court and the tight-lipped smiles of the dowager archduchesses. A string quartet played a slow waltz, and Alaric led her onto the parquet floor, his grip tight against her waist. "You'll learn quickly, I think," he murmured, his breath stale with wine. "Obedience suits you." She said nothing, but when the dance ended and the guests were distracted by champagne, she slipped away through the corridor behind the servants' stairs. Her heart pounded as she made her way to the stables. He was already there. Soren stood by the door, cloaked in a dark riding coat, a single lantern in his hand. 2 horses were saddled and waiting. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "I wasn't either," she replied. They rode out through the northern gate, just as the guards changed post, unnoticed in the mist. The road was slick with rain, the hooves throwing up mud, and neither of them spoke until the palace lights had vanished behind the trees. "I don't know where we're going," she said, her voice trembling. "I do," he said, "but we'll need to move fast. Alaric won't wait for permission to come after you." "How long before they notice?" "An hour. Maybe less." She glanced sideways at him. "Will he challenge you?" "If he finds me, he will. But I won't let him win." They rode until dawn painted the sky in pale gold. At the edge of a quiet village near the Hungarian border, they stopped, breathless and soaked to the bone. Soren dismounted and helped her down, his hands lingering a second longer than they needed to. "I know a man here," he said. "He owes me a favor. We'll rest, and then we move again." Lysandra met his gaze, the fear in her chest giving way to something steadier. "Why are you doing this?" "Because no one should be promised to a man like him," he said. "And because the first time I saw you, you were standing alone in the courtyard as if the whole world was pressing down on you. I wanted to take some of that weight." She touched his sleeve, gently. "You already have." And for the first time in days, she smiled. The house stood at the edge of a poppy field, low-roofed and soot-streaked, its shutters fastened tight against the wind. A pale wisp of smoke curled from the chimney, and the scent of wood ash mingled with the sharp tang of wet earth. Soren dismounted first, tying his horse to the post before reaching up to take Lysandra's reins. Her legs trembled when she slid to the ground, not from fear now, but exhaustion. Inside, the hearth still held heat. A kettle hung above the embers, and an oil lamp glowed dimly on the table. A man in a wool vest and fingerless gloves stood near the window, his face lined and weathered, dark brows drawn low. "You're early," he said to Soren. "The border's crawling. We couldn't risk stopping again." The man's gaze shifted to Lysandra. "She's the reason?" Soren stepped between them. "She's under my protection." The man grunted and turned to the cupboard. "Then she'll need dry clothes." Lysandra did not protest when Soren took her cloak and laid it by the fire. Her hair clung to her temples, and her sleeves dripped onto the floor. The warmth of the hearth was a balm, but it was the silence that steadied her most, the absence of expectation, of ceremony, of watching eyes. When she returned from the adjoining room, wrapped in a homespun tunic and shawl, Soren poured 2 cups of tea and set them on the table. The old man had gone upstairs, leaving them alone in the flickering lamplight. "His name is Janos," Soren said. "My mother's cousin. He helped me disappear once." Lysandra sipped the tea. It was bitter, but it warmed her throat. "You've done this before?" she asked. Soren nodded. "Different reason. Same stakes." She studied the hollows of his face, the faint scar that curved beneath his left eye. "Why did you go back to the palace?" "I owed something. To the man who trained me. I thought I could do more good from inside. And now, I've seen enough to know that good doesn't survive there." She traced the rim of her cup. "Neither do women." His voice dropped. "That's why we left." The fire popped, sending a spray of sparks up the flue. Outside, the wind pressed against the shutters, but within the small room, time felt suspended. Lysandra leaned forward, her voice quieter. "Do you think he'll follow us this far?" Soren's jaw tensed. "He has the resources, but he'll wait to see if we make it across the border first. If we stay too long in one place." "I understand." He looked at her then, not as a fugitive noblewoman, not as a burden or a symbol, but as someone who had chosen something dangerous and uncertain over safety in chains. "You don't flinch easily," he said. "I've flinched for years. No one noticed." He didn't look away. "I noticed." Her hand stilled on the table. For a long breath, neither spoke. Then she said, "Did you ever think your life would lead here? I thought I'd die in uniform. Alone." She tilted her head. "And now, I'm not alone." The words hung between them, unadorned and without demand. She looked down, then back up, her voice steadier this time. "I don't regret leaving. I know. They didn't touch. They didn't need to." The closeness was in the silence, in the way their shoulders leaned slightly toward one another, in the absence of everything that had once held them apart. Later, when the fire burned low and the wind quieted, Janos returned with a bundle of papers. "If you're going to cross into Transylvania," he said, placing them on the table, "you'll need different names." Soren sorted through them, documents forged with care, bearing seals not easily questioned. "Merchants," Janos said. "Textiles from Brno. That'll get you through the first post." Lysandra ran her fingertips over the name written beside her photograph. "Klara Dvorkova." "It suits you," Soren said. She met his eyes. "What's yours?" "Tomas Novak." She smiled faintly. "We'll be strangers." "No," he said. "We'll be free." In the quiet that followed, Janos added, "You have until morning. After that, I can't help you further." Lysandra folded the papers into her satchel. "That's enough." Before they turned in for the night, Soren handed her a folded scrap of paper. "It's my mother's prayer," he said. She wrote it before she passed. Said it was for those who walk unwelcome roads. Lysandra unfolded it slowly. The ink had faded, but the handwriting was firm. She didn't read it aloud. When she looked up, her voice was soft. I think she would have liked me. She would have fought for you. She nodded once. Then let's not waste her blessing. They slept in separate rooms, a thin wall between them, but neither one felt alone. They departed before first light, when the sky was still the color of pewter and the frost on the grass had not yet begun to melt. Janos stood in the doorway, arms folded, watching as they mounted the borrowed cart. Soren at the reins, Lysandra beside him, wrapped in a wool shawl with her new identity tucked against her chest like a talisman. The road eastward was rutted and slow, winding through forests stripped bare by autumn. No one spoke for the first hour. The hush of the land seemed too fragile to disturb, and the rhythm of the horses' hooves offered its own kind of reassurance. Every turn of the wheel took them farther from the palace, but not yet beyond its reach. When the sun lifted above the hills, Soren finally asked, "Do you know how to sew?" She glanced sideways. "I can mend a hem." "You'll need more than that," he said. "We'll reach a village by nightfall. They trade linen there. If we're merchants, we'll be expected to demonstrate something." "I'll learn," she said, not defensively, but with quiet resolve. Then, after a pause, "Did you expect me to hesitate? I didn't expect you to adapt this quickly. I didn't know I could." The cart jostled over a crooked stone, and she steadied herself with one hand on the seat. Her fingers brushed his, and both of them stilled. He didn't pull away, only said, "The next few days will be the most dangerous. Once we cross into Transylvania, the terrain gives us cover. But until then, I'm not afraid," she interrupted, then added more softly, "Not of the road." His eyes remained fixed on the path ahead. "Then what?" She hesitated, watching the line of trees peel past them. "Of losing this. Of waking up and finding I never left." "You did." She turned toward him. "But what if I become her again? The girl who said yes to silence, to gilded rooms and locked doors." He drew a slow breath. "Then I'll remind you who you became instead." They reached the village by mid-afternoon. It was a small place, nestled in a hollow between two hills, where smoke rose thin from chimneys and chickens scattered at the sound of wheels. Soren guided the cart behind a cooper's barn and tethered the horses beneath an old linden tree. They kept their papers pinned beneath their coats. Inside the cloth hall, bolts of flax and wool hung in dusty rows. An elderly woman with a milk-toothed smile greeted them, speaking in clipped Romanian. Soren responded in kind, his voice slower, more deferential. They were offered a corner bench and a pot of boiled barley tea. Lysandra watched the woman's fingers move with practiced ease across a length of bleached linen, then leaned forward and asked, "May I try?" The woman raised an eyebrow, then nodded. A needle was pressed into her hand, and the cloth laid across her lap. Her stitches were uneven, but she kept her hands steady. After several minutes, the woman grunted approvingly and gestured to a basket of thread. It wasn't praise, exactly, but neither was it dismissal. That evening, they slept above the stable in a hayloft that smelled of apples and wool. The cold crept through the boards, but they lay close, not touching, yet no longer needing distance. Soren lay on his back, his eyes on the rafters. "My father once told me that loyalty is a blade with two edges. It cuts those who wield it as often as those it's meant to defend." Did you believe him? Not then. And now? I think he was warning me. He turned his head. Alaric never understood loyalty. Only possession. She didn't respond immediately. Then, do you think he'll ever stop looking? No, but I think he'll grow careless. And when he does, I'll be ready. She exhaled slowly, then reached into her satchel and withdrew the folded prayer he had given her. She held it out, not to return it, but to share it. "Will you read it to me?" she asked. He hesitated only a moment before taking it. His voice was low but steady as he read the lines, words written by a woman he'd loved and lost. Lysandra listened without blinking. When he finished, she said, "You don't have to protect me." "I know," he said, "but I want to." The quiet that followed was full, not empty. Beyond the barn, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of wet hay and distant pine. Somewhere in the village, a dog barked once, then fell silent. Lysandra closed her eyes. "I think I might sleep tonight." He nodded. "You're safe." And for the first time since leaving Vienna, she believed it. By the fourth day, The hills unfurled into gentler slopes, and the trees thinned into brittle orchards where the last autumn pears clung stubbornly to boughs. The cart's wheels creaked over gravel and frost-hardened earth, and Soren guided them with one gloved hand, his other resting lightly on his knee. The road curved around a shallow bend, revealing a crumbling chapel spire and a cluster of smoke-gray rooftops beyond. "We'll stay here tonight," he said quietly. Lysandra nodded, tucking the edge of her shawl beneath her chin. Her fingers were raw from thread work, her palms striped with faint red seams from the loom she'd practiced on the day before. Each village asked something different of them, linen thread in one, wool counting in another, and she met each test without complaint. The inn was small, timber-framed, and slanted slightly to the left. A carved wooden fish hung from its eaves, swaying in the breeze. The innkeeper, a square-shouldered woman with close-cropped hair, offered them a single room with a narrow bed and a basin of clean water. Lysandra stood beside the washstand, dipping her fingers into the icy bowl. "This place feels older than the others." "It is," Soren said, lifting his satchel onto the stool. "It predates the Habsburg border reforms. Used to be a monastery outpost." She dried her hands on her skirt, studying the faded crucifix above the lintel. "Do you believe in any of it?" He unbuckled his boots before answering. "I believe in people who carry burdens they never asked for." "That's close enough." She turned to him. "What burden are you carrying?" He paused, then lowered his voice. "There was a boy in Sarajevo. He was meant to be executed for theft bread and a wool cloak. I was ordered to oversee it." He looked down, lacing his fingers together. "Instead, I let him slip through the alley. I was demoted for a week. Quiet punishment, but I still see his face." She stepped closer, the floorboards creaking beneath her. "You saved him." "I disobeyed," he corrected. "Not the same thing." She touched his shoulder, not a brush or a graze, but a steady palm, warm with quiet certainty. "To me it is." That night, they slept with a breath's width between them, her head on the folded shawl, his hand resting loosely above his chest. Neither reached for the other, but neither pulled away. The room held no heat, and still, they did not shiver. At dawn, they rose and dressed in silence. Soren checked the false documents again, smoothing the creases with the back of his hand. Lysandra plaited her hair into a single cord and fastened it with a brass pin the innkeeper had given her in exchange for mending a torn sleeve. As they stepped out into the gray morning, a figure blocked the path. He wore a long wool coat, a cavalry hat tucked beneath one arm, and bore the insignia of a minor Viennese consulate. His beard was clipped short, and his gloves were too fine for travel. "You're a long way from Brno," he said in Hungarian accented German, eyes flicking from Soren to Lysandra. Soren didn't blink. "We trade linen. The innkeeper gave us direction to the next market." The man tapped the end of his glove against his palm. "Your name?" "Tomas Novak." The man turned to Lysandra. "And yours, Fräulein?" She met his gaze without wavering. "Clara Dvorkova." He studied her face for a long moment, then stepped aside. "Be careful on the pass. Wolves come down early this year." They passed him without turning, breath held until the village fell behind them, lost again among the trees. An hour later, when they stopped near a brook to wash their hands and refill the canteen, Lysandra crouched beside the water and looked up at him. He knew. Soren shook his head. He suspected, but we didn't give him cause. She watched the current rush past, icy and fast. "I thought I'd tremble, but I didn't." "You held your ground." "I think I understand now," she said, standing. "The difference between fear and choice. I couldn't name it before." He held the canteen out to her. "You never needed to name it. You only needed to act." Their fingers touched as she took it, and this time, neither of them looked away. The road narrowed as they climbed that afternoon, rising into a gorge flanked by shale and pine. Snow clung in slivers to the northern shadows, and the wind sharpened. They stopped beside a stone shrine carved into the rock, where someone long ago had left a string of dried marigolds. Soren dismounted to check the cart's wheels, brushing frost from the axle. Lysandra stood near the shrine, fingertips tracing the weathered inscription beneath the arch. "My mother used to say that names live longer when they're carved in stone," she said. He looked up. "Do you miss her?" "I don't know who she was. She left when I was 3. All I remember is the scent of rosemary." She turned, brushing her hair back from her cheek. "My father said she was soft." Too soft for court. Soren straightened. Then maybe you've inherited the part of her that knew when to leave. That night, they reached a hilltop village where the roofs glinted with frost and smoke curled from every chimney. They took shelter in a half-abandoned mill house, the owner away for the winter. Inside, the floor was layered with grain sacks, and the corners held the scent of crushed rye. Lysandra lit a single lamp, its glow casting long shadows across the rafters. Soren pulled the shutters closed, then turned to her. You've come farther than most would have dared. I didn't do it alone, she said. He stepped forward, voice low. You're not a passenger in this. Her eyes searched his face. Then what am I? He took her hand, not sudden, not urgent, simply certain. My equal. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. She only stepped into the space between them, her hand still in his, and rested her forehead against his chest. He let his chin fall gently against her hair. The wind howled outside, but within the quiet of the mill house, a softer destiny was no longer a hope. It was already becoming real.